Attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good day to all and welcome to the webinar. My name is Carolyn Lawrence and I am the Director of Corporate Development for APICS. Joining me today on the web broadcast is John Brandt, CEO of the MPI Group. We are excited that you're joining us today as we share insight on achieving superior operational performance in the chemical industry. Just a bit of housekeeping. For the remainder of the broadcast, you are all in listen-only mode. We have included time prior to the end of the session to answer questions. Please type your questions in the question box located in the panel on your screen as we move through this presentation. If we are unable to answer all of the questions prior to the end of the broadcast, we will follow up with answers to all of your queries. Finally, this presentation and the link to this webinar will be sent to each of you after the broadcast. During our time today, we're going to be looking specifically at the current state of the chemical industry, both qualitatively and quantitatively. Before we get started, just a little bit about APICS. APICS is the world's leading community for end-to-end supply chain excellence. We focus on working with individuals and companies to advance supply chain optimization through our education, through our body of knowledge, research, systems, and methods. We offer ways for you to engage at the various levels of your organizations. We believe that fostering the advancement of the end-to-end supply chain management, APICS can improve people, who then improve supply chains that improve economies, which at the end of the day improves lives. APICS also knows that the journey to supply chain excellence is not easy. As a premier professional association for supply chain management, we provide resources, tools, and techniques to transform your supply chain to gain business value with both bottom and top line results. Standard metrics and best-in-class benchmarks like those we will present today play a pivotal role in creating supply chain excellence. However, to gain full business values, companies need to implement not only performance, but also organization, process, and people improvements. The APICS for Business value proposition has integrated products and services that can be configured to unbiased, standardized, customer-centric implementation solutions to deliver business value and to build leaders. Supply chain management and transformation usually begins with an assessment at the individual supply chain level. Studies in the last 20 years have shown that an assessment of any supply chain typically follows a scalable, repeatable implementation roadmap like the one shown here. It requires engaging a cross-functional team led by a respected supply chain leader as champion, supported by an active executive sponsor who defines a burning platform, aligns the program with strategy, and ultimately provides resources. This team develops a strategic pilot and puts together a charter for the pilot that includes scope, objectives, team, and schedule. Performance, practices, process, and people are analyzed to develop a baseline. This is where benchmarking, like we're going to discuss today, becomes so very valuable. Once performance gaps are identified, organizations like yours can develop and implement a focused project portfolio that will provide a definitive return on investment while being tied to overall company strategic goals. The key we have learned is to think big, act small, and scale implementation fast. If you want more information on how APICS can work with your organization to improve your supply chains, please feel free to contact me. My contact details are included at the end of this presentation. As I mentioned previously, benchmarks and best practices are critical to understanding the current state and performance gaps of the strategic supply chain. To share with you some exciting benchmarking research recently conducted in the chemical industry, I am excited to introduce John Brandt, CEO and founder of the MPI Group. John has devoted more than 2 decades to studying leadership in effective, purpose-driven organizations. As an expert on how companies can adapt themselves to the realities of new markets, new corporate structures, and new customer expectations, Brandt is an accomplished management innovator and an internationally recognized expert in manufacturing and technology. Before founding the MPI Group in 2003, John was publisher and editor-in-chief of Industry Week magazine, which garnered more than 70 editorial awards of excellence and doubled its revenue under his leadership. Additionally, John serves as the president, publisher, and editor-director of the Chief Executive Group, publisher of Chief Executive, where his leadership transformed the magazine into one of the publishing's most surprising comebacks. A frequent lecturer around the globe on topics ranging from leadership and customer value to management best practices and building world-class communities, John is the recipient of the prestigious Neal Award and has served as a member of the Manufacturing Extension Partnership National Advisory Board and a judge for the National Association of Manufacturers Awards for Workforce Excellence. He currently serves as the co-chair of the Northeast Ohio Product Innovation Initiative, is an advisory board member of both SupplierInsight.com and Ken Tools Manufacturing, and is the director of the Work in the Northeast Ohio Council and president of the Press Club of Cleveland. Please join me in welcoming John Brandt.
Thank you. It is a pleasure to be with everyone here today. We are going to talk about some recent research. We want to talk about chemical benchmarks and best practices. Most importantly, I want to share with you research that we've done in this industry and maybe discuss some of the implications for this. And I'm hoping that we'll get some great questions where we can maybe even get a little discussion going about what this means going forward. We're going to talk about three things today. We're going to talk about the state of the industry. We're going to talk about performance levels, and then we're going to talk about best practices. So with that, why don't we get going? So, oops, a little eager there on my clicking. This is an industry at a really interesting inflection point right now. This is an industry that is led by massive, massive companies, and you can see this list here. You know, you've got BASF, Dow, Mitsubishi, Lyondell, Exxon. You've got enormous companies. And yet there is an opportunity for smaller companies right now because of lower feedstock prices and because of an increasing focus on folks who want niche markets and niche products. There is an increasing opportunity for smaller companies if they can be nimble, if they can be quick, if they can leverage best practices going forward. And the slides are stuck, I believe. There we go. All right. The chemical industry, and some of the challenges we're seeing right now is that there are an enormous number of new competitors popping up around the world. There have been weak sales and weakening prices over the last couple of years. We all know what has happened with regulation. What this all means is that because there, especially in North America, there's been some new capacity coming online that is going to emphasize, put some downward pressure on prices. It's expected that EBITDA in this industry is going to slip by 1 or 2% year over year this year. So there are a lot of challenges. On the other hand, there are enormous opportunities right now. There are technological advances, not just within the processes and machinery within this industry and new formulations, et cetera, but also some opportunities we're going to discuss by using the Internet of Things, IoT technologies to improve production. I mentioned before there's a lot of new markets for niche chemicals, a lot of micro markets that are emerging. There are mergers and acquisitions. Just in the M&A space alone, last year completed deals were slightly down versus 2015, but there's a backlog of about $300 billion of potential transactions. And if you take a look at revenue opportunities related to the IoT in terms of improving production, but also starting to figure out how to use IoT in products and in delivery of products, there are some estimates that there's $167 billion worth of opportunity there. So tons of challenges for this industry, but also tons of opportunities going forward. What this means, though, is that when you've got opportunities like this, when you have challenges like this, it's really important for executives to be strategic and to be looking forward, but it is even more important for those executives to make sure that they've got people working operationally to figure out how do we build a really solid operational foundation so that we can grow, so that we can take advantage of these opportunities, so that we can meet these challenges. What we find is that in getting ready, when you find companies that are doing great things, they are focusing on that foundation of operational excellence to make sure that they've got the processes in place that they can be first to market with new products, new innovations, to make sure that they're using new technologies, including the IoT, to make sure that one of the things is customers want more customized products, more niche products. Something that's been a trend within the discrete manufacturing industries for years, rapid changeovers, is increasingly important in process industries, and especially in the chemical industry. And of course, when there's M&A opportunity and there's money out there, you're always wanting to look at improving your book value so that you can maximize the opportunity for you to acquire or to be acquired. The first step in any operational is to, whether you're working on your business, whether you're working on your golf game, whatever you're working on, the first step is to take a look at where are you right now and how do you rate versus everybody else. So in looking at that, you want to look at, we look across the board when we're looking at manufacturers. We want to look at things like reliability, at speed, at costs, at quality, and at asset optimization. And that's what I want to start with here today, is talk a little bit about where are people at with those. So it is absolutely critical in any industry, but especially in this industry, for people to make sure that their plants are reliable, that you're creating good product on time. What we find in this industry is that machine availability rates tend to be on par with manufacturing in general, roughly about the same, but there's a lot of opportunity for reliability to improve. If you look down at that chart there, you see the median for machine availability is 90%. One of the numbers here that concerns me when I look at this industry is that if you look at this, you've got chemical plants across the board as an average there are devoting over 10% of their upkeep, of their maintenance, to unplanned maintenance. And what that means is unplanned maintenance is obviously the worst kind of maintenance, because not only are you paying for it, it's typically more expensive, it's also typically stopping production or causing an accident or worse. So this is not good, and there are ways to minimize that with some techniques we'll talk about later, some technologies. You can see what's happened with first pass yield, pretty high. Scrap and rework, relatively high, I still think, at 2%. And if you look at overall equipment effectiveness, the median is at 82%. So I'd encourage you to take a look at your numbers and see where you fit in all that. And take a look especially at that unplanned maintenance number, because that is a very high number. So given that, despite maybe some of those issues, chemical plants in general deliver significant returns on investment. We saw in the last several years, as with the worldwide comeback from recession, the Great Recession came back, capacity utilization increased, but it may have peaked because production volume is getting close to 80%, which is generally considered to be sort of a peak capacity number unless you're doing something to improve your processes, improve production. You can see that ROIC is high, return on capital investment is high, but it hasn't moved much over the last 3 years. And given some of the downward pricing pressures that we're expecting this year, given some of the other things we're going to talk about a little bit later, that is a concern, because you would think that as the economy improves, as sales improve, people would be figuring out how to increase margins going forward, and they seem to have stalled in the numbers we're looking at here. We found, obviously, that if everybody in this industry knows, but research confirms, people in this industry are obviously focused very intently on their product and on operations quality, because quality is a key differentiator in any industry. It's especially important in the chemicals industry. It's even more important given increased regulatory scrutiny on this industry. We saw some improvement in product quality performance, warranty costs declining from 2.1% to 1.5%. Those are averages over a 3-year period. Still some room for improvement there. But when you look around at the intense scrutiny and at the liability potential for chemical companies, this is an area that people are going to want to work on. I mean, you look at REACH and GHS, environmental regulations. Industry has done some since 1990 in reducing greenhouse gas emissions. I know there's a lot of talk about potential regulatory reform in the United States. That may or may not occur. We're not seeing a lot of movement of legislation right now in the U.S. Congress. This is something that is clearly, whatever happens in the short term, in the long term, focus on quality, focus on some environmental and meeting regulatory requirements is going to be increasingly important in this industry. It is no surprise to anybody in this industry that these plants run very rapidly. That's good news right now. It's also a little bit tough, though, because it is difficult to improve delivery rates to customers given some of the transportation issues, logistic issues of getting things to customers. We have seen manufacturing cycle time in this industry improve over the last 3 years. If you look at this, you've got cycle time median at 10 hours now. It was 12.5 hours 3 years before. If you look at the perfect delivery rate, which is the percentage of goods that are delivered on time to what the customer requested with a perfect delivery and to the customer specifications, that's at 95%. That's not bad. Could get a little bit better. So we've seen some improvement here. I think there are some technologies out there that are going to improve production, improve speed here, and be able to improve quality for folks as well. And we'll talk about those in a little bit. Again, this is an industry that has historically outperformed other manufacturing industries in terms of productivity. I mean, if you look at manufacturing in general, the average is productivity in terms, if you measure it in sales per employee, is $256,000. In chemical, it's $374,000. These are typically large plants operating automated equipment at high volume. It's not surprise. And a majority of these plants were able to increase their productivity over the last year. Cost of goods sold is about the same as the rest of manufacturing. But again, I want to point out once more that scrap and rework as a percentage of annual plant revenue, that's a big percentage, 2% there. That is something that with improved processes, improved adoption of best practices, things can be worked on and can be managed. So let's talk then a little bit about best practices, a little bit about what people can do to work on some of these. This is where I think there's a huge opportunity here, and I want to stress this, is because we're going to go through a series of things that people can do, and stuff that you see in other manufacturing industries is typically just not done at the same rates or at the same level in the chemical industry. And what do I mean by that? Well, take a look at improvement methodologies. So you've got most facilities saying they have adopted some improvement methodologies. 86% said they did. You even got people saying they've at least tried or are using a little bit of lean manufacturing at close to 60% of plants. And you've got close to half of plants saying that they've either made significant progress toward or fully achieved world-class status. The problem comes in, as often happens, when you start looking down into specific practices that would tell you whether, and typically the reason that I like to look at this is that if you ask people, have they adopted a specific improvement methodology or continuous improvement, a lot of people say, well, yes, because they may have just tried it, somebody went to a seminar, somebody read a book, they tried it in one line, they tried it in one aspect of the plant, etc. What we like to do is dig down a little bit more and ask about specific practices, because that typically gives you a better picture of how thorough, how deep, how long-term an implementation has been, and whether it's serious or not. And when you look at this, you ask even about continuous improvement, it drops to 72%. Benchmarking, only 62%. You start looking down at all the other ones, quality certifications, waste elimination, total productive maintenance, strategy, policy deployment, Kaizen events, problem, plan, do, check, adjust, problem solving, down at the 9% level. It is clear that in this industry, a lot of the practices that you would think would be that in general you see at a plant that is really serious about an improvement methodology or continuous improvement just are not being adopted at the same rates. And that's a concern, and that may explain some of the other metrics we looked at earlier, the scrap and rework, the unplanned maintenance, why those numbers seem persistently high and oddly high compared to maybe some other industries. There's a lot of reasons for this, but one of the reasons that can happen is that if you look at overall at all of manufacturing right now, obviously improvement methodologies, there's a lot of them, theory of constraints, Six Sigma, lean, etc. When you look across most of manufacturing, you've got about 80% of manufacturers who have tried lean, obviously much lower in this industry. The reason that is that lean, especially early on, was often perceived by those in the chemicals industry and really in any process industry as being something you only did as for the only discrete manufacturers would do, because it was only related to one piece, flow processes, labor-intensive operations. You're working on this, and that's how you do it. What we are finding more and more is that right now what you're finding in process industries is that people are now saying, look, there's ways for us to adopt lean, there's ways for us to use lean in this. So one example of this is Adam Russell, who's for the Eastern Chemical Company, talks about the fact that you need to get away from just thinking about lean as something that is for discrete manufacturers, and take it and just take the principles of lean, but remove it from that sort of discrete context. And the way he suggests to do it, and I'd encourage you to, with an article in Chemical Processing called Go Lean, is, do what lean does in that, figure out what is your value, map your value creation process, and then figure out what are those measures that matter to your organization. And then when you're taking a look at that value stream, take a look at what are the things that are impeding that. What are the things, for example, I would look at that are causing the unplanned maintenance? What are the root causes of that? Try to figure out how, not just in that instance that's happening, but what are other things around it, and what are other cultures, behaviors around it that are contributing to that. He also talks about the fact that within many process plants, because they're so automated, because they've been done things one way for a long time, a lot of times there's a sense that we can't change it. It would be too big. It would be too overwhelming. And what you want to see is people taking a look at, okay, how would we do this differently? And one of the ways to start with that is to benchmark, as we're talking about here, but benchmark not just by looking at metrics, but by going to other facilities. And go to facilities not just in your industry, but go to others. People in a given industry tend to know a lot about what's going on in that industry. What we have seen over and over again is that where people learn the most is when they go visit plants in some other industry. And because the reality is when somebody comes up with a great new idea in an industry, it is usually not the first time it was thought of on the planet. It was usually benchmarked from one industry and brought to another. So that is the way to take a look at, and I would really encourage you to take a look at lean, but lean, taking it out of that discrete context and putting it into a process context. Related to this, and again, I don't want to sound like a broken record here, but we saw this over and over again in this industry. Inventory management practices that you would expect to see at manufacturing plants are generally missing in a lot of chemical plants. And which is, I'll talk about the specific practices that are missing, but you could have predicted this by just by looking at it and finding that close to 4% of a plant's total inventory on, at an average is obsolete. And the reason you get obsolete inventory is because you're not managing your inventory. You look at this, just-in-time supplier deliveries, only a third of plants. Pull systems with Kanban, quarter. Quick equipment changeovers, 22%. RFID and computerized inventory tracking, 20%. I mean, these numbers are horrible. They're terrible. And it's by not using these, that's what happens, and that's what creates these inventory, this incredibly high inventory rate that is obsolete. So there are real opportunities to adopt not necessarily even leading edge stuff, but things that other manufacturers and other industries have been doing for a number of years. Here's an example. This is an anonymized case study. This was a global chemical company. They provide water treatment solutions, and they were having what seems to be a problem in the chemical industry in that they could not manage its inventory on hand. Matter of fact, at one point, they saw a 20% increase in their inventory levels in less than 4 months. Everybody on this phone understands what that does to your cash flow, what it does to your bottom line, what it does to carrying costs, frankly, what it does to production processes when people start seeing inventory pile up there. So they decided with a two-part management solution. And this is not rocket science here. This was just blocking and tackling. They set up ordering and stocking policies, which unbelievably enough they didn't have before. And then they established processes that they could maintain to continuously monitor, control, and improve their inventories. And you can set this up through your ERP system or however you want to do it. What they were able to achieve in a very short period of time was to reduce their carrying costs of on-hand inventory by almost a third. They increased their inventory turns from 8 to 9. And because they were monitoring it, they had visibility, and all managers and executives had visibility into taking a look at their inventory levels. Because the reality is in management, this is just Peter Drucker 101. What gets measured gets managed, what gets managed gets better. And so this is, in some ways, just as simple as awareness and putting a team on it to figure out how are we going to manage our inventory better. We do find that most chemical plants are trying to pay attention to human resources and to best practices. You've got a little under half who have empowered a majority of their production workforce, and that is something that we see over and over again. Plants that really perform well, the larger the percentage of your workers who are empowered or in self-directed work teams, they're managing the work themselves, the better the performance. You've got about a half of employees are fully engaged in their plant's improvement methodology, whichever one it is, whether it's Lean, Six Sigma, whatever it is. Again, we find over and over again, we've been doing this study 20 years at this point. The more employees you have engaged in an improvement methodology, the better you do. The longer you've had the improvement methodology in place, the better you do. And then we've got 41% of plants who say they train each employee more than 40 hours annually. That's actually pretty good for an industry average. 40 hours is what we have found over the last 20 years to be sort of the world-class standard. If you want to be world-class, you're going to have to train at least 40 hours per employee per year. If you look at really top-performing plants, they typically train even more, 60 hours, 80 hours. We've seen plants training as much as 300 hours per year in specific industries. I'm not saying you need to do that, but we do see that these plants that train more generally outperform. You know, we ask what HR practices and programs you're using. I know this presentation will be made available in a PDF format to everybody afterward. I'm not going to read through those. But again, there could be more done here. The percentages at the top are not bad. The more those improve for your specific plant, the better your performance is going to be. Great example of a company that invests very heavily in HR in this industry is Dow Chemical. I mean, they got 50,000 employees. They got, if you're an experienced employee, your median pay is close to 100,000, and they put a lot of effort into developing a diverse workforce, having mentoring, having cultural training, having classroom training. They invested in flexible work options, et cetera. And this leads to incredibly high job satisfaction. Close to 80% of employees say that they report high job satisfaction. Investing in employees is something that always makes your results better in the long term. We've seen this over and over again. Companies that train more, companies that empower more, companies that invest in their employees get that back in spades from their employees. Continuing the list of things that chemical plants could probably do more of, supplier management best practices are just generally missing at a lot of places. When we said, you know, do you describe what's your relationship as a plant? What's this plant's relationship with suppliers? Is it a partnership? You've got only about a quarter who report it being that way. You've got only 23% who describe their relationship with their customers as a partnership. And then when you get down and you look at specific supply chain management practices, again, things that you would want to see in a place that was managing their supply chain well and proactively. Certification is the only one we see that's over half. Everything else is underneath 50%. Supplier management, sharing forecasts, customer sat surveys, collaborative design with suppliers and customers, access to customer forecasts. When you look at that, chemical plants are really most likely to just measure, document, you know, quality and reliability and delivery to schedule of their own suppliers. When you look at other things like, are they documenting criteria and performances of their suppliers? Hardly anybody's doing that. And that's a problem given the fact that traceability is becoming either a regulatory requirement in many industries and in many regulatory locations, and is sometimes becoming a de facto customer requirement. Taking a look at traceability of ingredients, traceability of components, traceability. What are the labor practices? What are the ethics of your suppliers? And you've got an industry here right now which is not doing as much as many other industries. So how do you get started? What should you do if you're trying to get started on this? Well, you need to take a look, and I think Caroline mentioned it right at the start. You have to start with benchmarking. You have to figure out, your process of your method and figure out against an industry standard, and the SCORE model is a good one, or some other some other model is how are we doing versus that. Of course, the challenge then is to figure out getting that number. You don't want to just get a number so you can feel good or bad about yourself, like, oh, we're really good on that, or oh, we're really terrible on that. You want to figure out how do we take that and then leverage that for improvement. And there's lots of ways. I kind of like what AMR put in, how to benchmark your supply chain. When you're taking a look at your supply chain, what you want to do is you want to figure out not just this specific product, not just this one thing. You want to take a look at your entire supply chain, tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 suppliers, rather than one particular aspect. You want to figure out, okay, why are we doing this? You know, what if we're benchmarking this, does this give us any useful information? How is this going to change behavior? That is the useful thing. If we were to find something about this, how would it change behavior, contracts, relationships? If it won't change any of those things, then you shouldn't bother tracking it. We also see that where people go wrong in starting an initiative like this is when they decide they're going to boil the ocean. They're going to decide we're going to do everything at once. You want to take a couple of things, start with that, and then expand that out. You want to make sure, as I said before, you want to focus on supply chain characteristics, who looks like who, not just a specific product, because that can then get you into, you know, taking a look at just the auction supply model where you're just going for low price, which is generally the worst way to run a supply chain because you're not looking at all kinds of other characteristics that can actually help you grow the business. You want to make sure that when you do this and you start small and you go forward, that you get the process right before you expand it. And there has to be this linkage where, okay, we have this output, we're going to measure this, we're going to take a look at this, and then ask yourself, what is the expected behavior change? What will we do differently? And then make sure that that process is sticky. How are we going to do this over and over again going forward? That's supply chain. If we look at sustainability, we find now that it is not a major focus at most chemical plants. We've got under a third who report that green and sustainability is highly important or important. And we've got actually a full third that say it's either only of minor importance or we don't care about it at all. You do see some green sustainability practices at some plants. They tend to be related to things where it directly translates to the bottom line: energy management, recycling and reuse. When you look at stuff like renewable energies, carbon footprinting, et cetera, much, much lower. Some of those programs do have an effect on the bottom line. Energy per unit of production was reduced by 6% over the last year, so as the average. But this is an area where chemical plants aren't doing a lot now. They either by customers or by regulatory fiat are likely to have to do more going forward. So what do you do? How do you change? You know, you want to start with benchmarking. You want to take a look at that for a number of these different areas. But what we see that really changes, and I've alluded to this before in this presentation, is how do you change the culture? And this is another anonymized case study here. You've got a specialty chemical plant, had close to 300 employees, and they basically, employees didn't like working there. You had more than 60% of the workforce were detached or disengaged, and that leads to a lot of things. It doesn't just lead to poor quality performance, which of course leads to poor financials. It also leads to people not caring about a safety program, which means your safety program is off. And safety is an incredibly important measure of employee engagement, and is also incredibly important, you know, just for the human cost, obviously. You know, you don't want people to get hurt, you don't want people to get killed. But beyond that, when you look at that, a company's focus on safety and sometimes using safety as a focus of improvement shows employees that there's an investment, that you care, and it also makes people think differently about processes and about how to do things. So leadership put a large investment in trying to change the culture by focusing on safety, by focusing on working with employees, sharing goals, et cetera, building a more collaborative work organization, sharing the goals, roles, communicating, figuring out, doing this. And by investing in culture, by the time they were done with this, they found where the disengagement of the workforce had gone from 60% down to 5%. What was amazing was that they saw incredible improvement in safety, an 83% improvement in reportable incidents per hours worked. And they also then saw, because of this improved focus on process, improved employee attitudes, improved their batches in specification by 78%, and they reduced batches out of specification by 89%. This is partly because an employee who is worried about their safety can't be, that is going to be their #1 priority, as opposed to trying to figure out how to do their job better. It's also, though, by creating a culture of engagement, by creating a culture where employees are treated importantly and where they understand what the goal is and they understand how they're going to share in the rewards of success, you create a team that works together. This is really important. If I was running a chemical plant and I was looking at these numbers and looking at some of these examples, I mean, I know that continuous improvement is important at any manufacturer. It's really important in this industry, in part because of the increased scrutiny from regulators and from customers right now, in part because of the fact that customers are wanting new products, micro-market products, but also because this is an industry where if you've got a number of people who aren't doing things that are sort of basic blocking and tackling in terms of improvement methodologies or continuous improvement, there's no quicker way to improve your bottom line and improve your competitive position than to improve your operations by just adopting some of these things that we all know work. And that, I mean, if anybody's interested, I can prove to you 6 ways from Sunday that it works. So we really I would encourage everybody on this call to take a look at some of the benchmark data that I presented. There's more available. There's benchmark from us, from APICS, from other sources. Take a look at that and figure out, okay, how are we going to improve our operations so we can make sure that we are running as well and as smoothly as we can right now, and that we are ready for the challenges, but also the huge opportunities going forward. I think we've got time for questions, but I'm going to turn it back over to Carolyn.
John, thank you so much for that informative and exciting presentation. I really learned a lot, and I hope everyone on the call shares in that. We have a lot to learn and a lot to gain from looking at how we're performing today. We do have a couple of questions that have come in. The first one, John, is on S&OP, and it says, how is S&OP being implemented in such chemical industries to manage the balance to manage the balance of the supply chain triangle, stocks, costs, and service levels?
I'm sorry, Carolyn, could you repeat the question? I'm sorry.
Sure. It says, how is S&OP being, okay, how is S&OP being implemented in chemical industries to manage the balance of the stock chain triangle, i.e. stocks, costs, and service level? Are we doing anything in an S&OP environment differently in the chemical industry that either helps or hinders our ability to balance the costs around stocks and service levels?
I think we're seeing some interesting stuff here. I think one of the issues that you see in this industry with S&OP is the fact that the linkages between customers and suppliers in terms of forecasts, et cetera, and it's only as good as the data that goes in. So given the fact that we've got fairly poor linkages, I mean the stat I had earlier where customers and suppliers generally are not considered, it's not a relationship, it's more transactional. So given the fact that forecasts are not being made available throughout the value stream, it's really hard to run S&OP, whether it's an annual operations plan or whatever, if you're just guessing at what the numbers are. So we see some interesting stuff going on here right now. I think the concern is that again, with the level of sharing of information among suppliers and customers, it's difficult to do.
Thank you, John. So the next question says, what do you see as the most important driver going forward for the best companies to increase their separation from the competition?
I would see a couple things. I mentioned before, I think first and foremost is just take a look at what are other industries doing right now. And there's a lot to be learned from what we've seen in some of the discrete industries in terms of the adoption of lean and some of these practices I talked about. I think that would be the first thing. I think the second thing would be to take a look at what's possible given the rapid adoption of the Internet of Things. This is the term Internet of Things was coined in 1999 in the Harvard Business Review. It was this conceptual idea that throughout most of human history, or I shouldn't say human history, throughout the computer age, a human had to be involved to enter data, etc. This is not AI we're talking about now, but we're now talking about with programming machines that can actually talk to each other without the requirement for humans. And so it's really become possible in the last 3 or 4 years for this. What does this mean for manufacturing and more particularly for the chemical industry? What it means is that you now have machines with equipped with Internet of Things technologies which can monitor themselves, report when they're out of spec. You can also have machines communicating with each other about production processes. You know, we're moving closer and closer to what we used to call the lights out factory. So there are opportunities here to improve quality as machines themselves are testing, to improve communication among machines so that they're actually running production so that they can, you know, I think one of the big opportunities with the IoT in this industry over the next several years is going to be to reduce some of that unplanned maintenance. If you've got machines that are reporting all the time, then you not only have machines that can tell you before they break down, you also are creating a data set that can be mined to figure out, okay, in general, we need to be doing maintenance, predictive maintenance. We need to be doing maintenance on this level. I think there's a huge opportunity here with the IoT in this industry, as I do in every industry, and I do think that over the next 5 or 6 years, there's going to be a competitive separation, as I think this person asked, between those people who make an aggressive investment in the IoT and those who don't.
Thank you, John. So the next question, when chemical manufacturers lower inventory, do you see any pressure on the chemical distributor to carry more inventory in order to maintain service levels?
Absolutely. That's a great question. In most industries, in this industry, you know, the problem is what we see is that there's some kind of a difference between playing the musical chairs with the inventory and actually taking a look at managing inventory in a more intelligent way. A lot of people will say, well, we have an inventory management program, but what they just do is what this person has just asked. They'll just force distributors to hold more of it. Or, you know, if they're going to take inventory in some industries, you'll see that even, you know, they take it, but they're not actually paying for it. They're making their suppliers pay the carrying costs. What really works is when you take a look at supply chain management and try to figure out, okay, it doesn't really change the inventory if we just move it here or move it there. How do we analyze this from a value stream perspective? How do we take a look at reducing inventory all along the way, sharing forecast information, sharing issues about supply chain if there's a problem, et cetera. So the answer to the question is yes, we do see that, but that's kind of when somebody's just playing musical chairs, not when they're actually working on inventory improvement.
Great, thank you. The next question is, do these numbers and information also apply to the agrochemical industry?
They do, but I want to be clear. This is an aggregate of all the chemical firms we surveyed, so it's not agro specific.
All right. Aside from changing the cultures to maintain status, are APICS certified people being given more than a second glance?
I'm going to let you answer
You're going to let me answer that one. Yes, we are seeing in the industries as a whole, not just the chemical industries, that many of our larger firms and many of the firms that we consider to be more of the firms that are on sort of the leading edge, they're really beginning to require certain certifications in order for persons inside of those organizations to be able to move up in their careers. In addition, we're seeing more and more people being offered the opportunity to grow and to change using not only the credentialing education that APICS provides, but also some basic education. John, the next question is, how many chemical firms were surveyed? Not certain if they missed that at the beginning.
That was, with this subset, I believe it was roughly 50.
All right, that appears to be our last question unless we have someone else that has one. We'll wait here for just a second to see if we get an additional question or two. All right, so if you would like some more information on how not only chemical firms, but manufacturing firms and all firms in general are using APICS and the benchmarking tools that APICS provides as part of their strategic supply chain programs, please feel free to reach out to me. My contact information is on the screen. In addition, please remember we will be sending you both the link to this webinar and the presentation itself. John's contact information will be on there if you have something specific to this particular benchmarking. We want to thank everybody for being in attendance today. We hope that you leave this webinar with some valuable information that you can take back and share within your organizations. And we look forward to providing additional updates and information. Please feel free to go to the APICS website, www.apics.org, to learn more about not only this benchmark but others as well. And we appreciate your attendance.